Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. You can see him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweating working for the man, alright. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take her home and put the sprinklers on, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk over everything racing. Joining me in the studio tonight, I have Seth, Eggert, Richard Youden, and Louise Torres. Gentlemen, how we doing tonight?
I'm good, thank you.
Doing good.
Pretty good. Cool. Seth, haven't heard from you in a few weeks. I know you've been busy covering these midweek NASCAR races and these still covering a lot of iRacing, but it's good to have you back on the show. And speaking of NASCAR has been in the news quite a bit lately for a couple of different reasons. But the big one is, of course, the banning of the Confederate flag, and this has spiked a lot of split reaction amongst fans and folks. Some folks are really applauding the decision. Other folks are staunchly against it, and they're using every argument you can imagine. And a lot of folks say they're done with NASCAR. But I mean, whatever. I've had so many people. I've been done with NASCAR for as long as I can remember. I get tired of reading the same rhetoric over and over again. But coming down to this thing here, and NASCAR attempted to do this in 2015, where they removed the Confederate flag, or they banned the flag from any of NASCAR merchandise or any team merchandise or any team trailers or anything like that. And then they asked the fans to, and I quote, refrain from displaying the flag at the events, although that was just a half-hearted, half-assed attempt that was never it was never enforced at all. Nobody, they said, we asked that you don't do this, but nothing really changed at that point. But now it's a total ban. So, Seth, you have some thoughts on this, I know.
Honestly, I do. Being a Jewish race fan, that flag has always been intimidating for me. I really wasn't exposed to it until I started going to races in Charlotte, Richmond, Bristol. Growing up in New Jersey, you didn't see it. You didn't see it at Dover. You didn't see it at Pocono or any of the tracks back up north. In 2015, I'm not going to name the track or the race because it's not their fault that this happened. But in 2015, after the invocation, being a Jewish race fan, I said shalom instead of amen. A few seconds later, a beer can exploded next to me. Looked behind me, and there were some fans with the Confederate flag shirts, and they started heckling me. I waited until the first caution, and I got up and left that section. Luckily, it was a rain out, so there were plenty of empty seats elsewhere. And I walked from turn 1 to turn 4 before I grabbed another seat because I didn't know if they were following me. And I even got stopped by, I don't know if it was track security or a cop. I think it might have been a cop because he even administered a breathalyzer test and had me do all of that because I reeked of alcohol because of the beer that exploded next to me.
So he gave you a breathalyzer test at a racetrack? Isn't everybody there kind of drinking beer?
Yes, I know.
Okay.
That's besides the point.
Yeah, well, I think this is a good move on NASCAR's part to do that. I think it's long overdue, And I think that any argument that anybody has to the contrary is very hollow. And the history and heritage argument, it falls flat with me, because honestly, that flag belongs in a Confederate museum or in a Civil War museum for sure. But I don't see the purpose in displaying it, in the modern day and age, especially since it was, repopularized by terrorist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, and it was also used by segregationist groups in the 40s and 50s to, where it made a comeback. Otherwise, you may not see that flag today. So we'll just have to see what happens from here. I mean, enforcing it at the track, because you're going to have folks that are going to try to push the boundaries. Sneak one in the camper and then put it up once they get in there, and then we'll have to see the sparks fly from there. So, but go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, just on the, the point of the meaning of this, of the flag, and obviously bear in mind, coming from the UK, my sort of historical background on this is very different. But we have, in Europe, our own historical symbols, if you like, that have alternate meanings from their original inception. But I go back to anybody that works in a commercial or corporate environment. One of the things everybody has to adhere to is corporate email policy, and everybody reads those, and everybody goes through corporate training, and the point that's always made is for topics that are when people send out emails on the sort of concept of appropriate email content and offensive and abusive email content. It's not what the person that sends an email finds abusive, it's what the recipient finds abusive. And at the end of the day, when you're in the public domain, you have a far bigger audience than you do people displaying the flag. There's one person displaying it when there's thousands of people viewing it. So you've got to take into consideration everybody else that's there at the venue. And just because you feel that something's okay, doesn't really take into consideration the other 20, 30, 40,000 people that are at the venue. And, we all share this big rock flowing around in space. And, we've got to take other people into consideration a little bit here at times.
Now, something I do want to say, which is more of a positive, after banning the flag, we did have a big influx of new fans that were interested in watching Martinsville and watching Homestead. I actually spent a lot of time on Twitter explaining and answering questions to former NFL players and current NFL players like Bernard Pollard Jr., Alvin Kamara, WNBA players like Renee Montgomery, people that I never would have thought I would have been interacting with on Twitter about NASCAR, let alone anything else, because for me, I'm just a motorsports fan. Frank, you know how poorly I did in fantasy football. I know next to nothing about football or soccer or any other stick and ball sport. So it's one of those where it was amazing to see so many people give NASCAR a chance just because of this one decision.
Yeah, and it's like I said, they're far from diverse. I think it was Willie T. Ribbs who said the other day. Willie T. Ribbs, who's a friend of the show, we've had him on before. He what was his quote? He said, "NASCAR's made a very good step, but they need to keep stepping." So but it is. I think it's a positive move. I do applaud the series for doing that, knowing how unpopular it is to a section of their fan base. But it's the right thing to do at the end of the day. So, but let's move on from the flag and talk about some of the races. Let's talk about the checkered flags. So NASCAR, we had 2 races since we were last on the show here. One at Martinsville and then at Homestead. And we saw Toyotas win both of those. Martin Truex in Martinsville, and then Denny Hamlin. Is this Denny's 3rd win of the year? Or his 4th?
Third win of the year.
3rd win of the year. So it seems like the early season struggles for Toyota are easing up a little bit. The Chevys and Fords still look strong. Kyle Busch, for some reason, seems to be nowhere this year. This is probably the worst start to a season Kyle's had since since he had the accident and had to miss the early part of the season.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, so let's.
He's only won once. He's only won once in the last year in the Cup level. Where I think between Michigan last year to now, he's only won once, and that was the championship deciding race at Homestead.
Well, that was a good one to win. So,
yeah, but still,
but
once he has only won in the Cup level in the last year.
Yeah, it's interesting to see Kyle get off to a kind of a slow start, but if I know anything about Kyle Busch, once he hits a stride, he becomes very tough to beat. So, but let's talk about Martinsville. Great win for Truex. Short tracks used to be Martin's Achilles heel. It took him a long time to win on a short track, and now this is his second Martinsville win. Am I correct?
In a row.
Right. Okay. So, Seth, Louise, Richard, you guys, let's talk about Martinsville. Who wants to start?
Well, Louise, you go first.
Okay. I was gonna say, go ahead, but overall, what they had in the short track, because that was going to be a big question mark for some of the drivers, like an Austin Dillon and a Tyler Reddick, how they're going to do, or even a Bubba Wallace with everything on his shoulder, kind of like carrying NASCAR on that very night, because that was the day that they announced about the whole Confederacy ordeal being banned. I was curious how they were going to do, and I think those RCR equipped cars, because correct me if I'm wrong, they're still Petty's cars are still powered by RCR, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
As Jermaine as well.
Want to double check. Bubba had a real strong car. Had it not been probably for Boyer trying to pull another 2012 on the field, who knows, Bubba would have got a stage win out of it, because he did stay out for 2 tires. They were right on the money, having a real strong car, but they just couldn't get the proper caution to be right up there. And same thing for Jimmy Johnson, because I felt like had a battle for 10th probably could have been a battle for a top 5, maybe a win. But those Penske trios it looked like they were going to be tough. But once Truex got up and the front of the field, there was no stopping Truex. It's all about that clean air and navigating through traffic. For Austin, he drove the distance up until he had a heating issue with the car. Something broke, which you guys can elaborate a little bit more. That he had to get out of the car. They had to take him out.
What happened was lap 5 or 6, he ran over debris. It cut the right rear tire, and the right rear tire shredded the crush panel, so all of the fumes were entering the car. And they didn't have a relief driver on hand because of the COVID-19 guidelines. So once he had to get out of the car was done for the day. Going back to Bubba real quick, he also would have run further up the field, except they had a droop chain fail on the left-hand side, which caused, instead of, I think the pit stops, instead of being 13 or 14 seconds, were in the 15 to 18 second range, which doesn't seem like much, but when the entire field was pitting, it dropped him every time they pitted. He entered inside the top 10, and he would leave like 15th to 18th. Ryan Blaney would have been in contention to battle with Truex, except during the final pit stop, a crew member dropped the air gun. Plus, they were over the wall too soon, so he had to restart from the rear.
Apart from that, they were great.
Yeah, and he rallied back to second, and Blaney, I believe, passed the most cars at Martinsville, because he also went a lap down that first run, and was stuck a lap down because Corey LaJoie stayed on track, trapping Blaney, Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, Eric Almirola, and others a lap down the entire race.
Yeah, it seems like all the entire race revolved around Corey LaJoie, and when it comes to lap traffic, that one, because the thing with Blaney, when he fell up there, he was leading like about 20 minutes before. And tells you how things can change at Martinsville.
It was definitely an interesting race, to say the least. You had Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman, and even Matt DiBenedetto for that matter, battling up front, and then they would fade, and then all of a sudden they came back and they were running up front again.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just a matter, as I mentioned, how things could change. You have to be right on it. This year, we've seen a lot of pit stop issues. Like, we're learning a lot of new things. Whether it's how many pumps does it take for a jack to go? If it's multiple, that's not a good thing these days.
It's typically 2 pumps is your aim. 2 pumps. If everything's working right and you're a good team, 2 pumps on your jack, you should get up. That's what we work towards anyway. And
I believe with the broken droop chain for Bubba, it was taking between 3 and 5 pumps.
Yeah, to get it up high enough to let the wheel hang. Yeah. One thing I did want to mention, bring up as a bit of a personal thing really, was James Small, the crew chief on the 19 for Martin Truex. He was a race engineer at Childress when I first joined the team, and Australian race engineer, used to work in the Australian Touring Car Series. And when I first moved over, he was a great help to me on a personal level. The transition from moving country and everything's a pretty big move. If anybody's ever done it, they'll know what I'm talking about. And James is a great guy, great engineer, really, really, really switched on. And he was a huge help to me on a personal level, but also a professional level. He was a top guy. And, he moved to Furniture Row, moved out to Denver with them, was a race engineer for Martin when Cole was there. Then moved over to Joe Gibbs when Furniture Row sort of folded. And he's got his chance to, Cole Purton's pretty big shoes to fill there in that 19 car. And, shows the continuities, is the way to go with these things. And massively, massively pleased with the guy. He's a great guy and a great engineer and deserves all the success. And I'm sure that's going to be the first of many wins for him as a crew chief in NASCAR. And really, really, really pleased for him. He's a great guy.
Yeah, I mean he's certainly aligned with the right guys and the right team if you want to win a lot of races. So, but it was really good to see him get his first win as a crew chief. Yeah, so
yeah, you align because you're good.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't. The top teams hire the top guys. That's how it works.
Exactly. A team like Joe Gibbs, if you can't cut the mustard, you ain't. You're going to be kicked out pretty soon. So, no, a huge amount of respect for James as an engineer and as a crew chief, and he's done a fantastic job there. So, fair play to him. It's not easy. I don't want to say this in a negative way, but as an outsider getting involved in the sport, and James has certainly answered any critics that he may have had on there, and hopefully that's the first of many. I really hope so.
Yeah, and that Australian Touring Cars series is that's a pretty solid series too. We've seen
it's very similar in lots of ways to NASCAR in terms of how the cars are built and set up and the geometries, but obviously they only race road courses. And of course you've seen with on the IndyCar side with McLaughlin coming over potentially, and also James Davidson, who's going to be racing at Talladega this weekend as well. So there is, and of course we've had who is his name? The guy that drove for Roush.
It's not Ambrose anymore.
Ambrose,
Yeah, Marcus Ambrose, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got great stories about that guy from some guys that I used to work with. Who was it he punched at Bristol?
Brian Scott, I think.
No,
that sounds right.
I think he punched somebody.
Casey
Mears. Yeah. Apparently,
it was the same weekend Brian Scott got kicked by Nelson Piquet. That's why I was thinking that.
Okay, yeah. The story goes very briefly, just to the Australian. Talking about James being Australian, obviously Marcus Ambrose Australian. The way these guys work is fantastic. Apparently, I used to know the competition director at Roush, and he was leaving the track after the Bristol race, and got a phone call from Marcus Ambrose's PA girl, and said, "You need to come back in the track." He's like, "Why?" Marcus has punched somebody. Oh God, no! Did anybody see it? And this is the point where he turns around, and on the Jumbotron at Bristol, you can see Marcus Ambrose punching Casey Mears. He's like, oh, God, no. So he goes into the trailer and finds Marcus Ambrose there, and he's like, what the hell do you do? And he said, well, I told him. He said, what do you mean you told him? I said, I told Casey Mears, if he doesn't let go of my fire suit, I'm going to punch him. And, well, he didn't let go of my fire suit, so I punched him. And that was his defense.
Sounds reasonable, right?
Yeah, I mean, perfect defense. He's like, well, I told him not to do it, and he did it, so I punched him.
Yeah,
What's the
multiple
problem?
warnings.
Yeah, I mean, what's the problem apart from it's all over the TV and over the jumbotron outside? Nothing wrong with that. No, at all. No, nothing. But
that stuff's good for ratings. Whenever we have a little driver scuffle, we see replays over and over and over again. Yeah, so
exactly. And the whole Australian sort of character and mannerisms that they no BS sort of thing from and it's perfectly true. And I'm sure James carries that over in his. I know my dealings with him. He was very straight, to the point, and I'm sure that's carrying over. And that's what you need as a crew chief. You need somebody who doesn't mess around, who comes to the point and goes with it. I think he's going to work really, really well. And we need more people like that in the sport. More people who don't play the PR game.
Speaking of driver run-ins and rivalries, Chase Elliott and Joey Logano at Homestead. Chase Elliott was leading. And Logano, after what happened at Bristol a few weeks ago, said, quote, Chase cost him a race, so he cost Chase a race, and held Chase up just enough for Hamlin to get by to take the win. Granted, would Hamlin have caught Chase and possibly gotten by him? Probably. But would he have been able to do it with the ease that he was able to do it? Probably not. So that's an interesting rivalry that's developing, as well as one between Hamlin and Corey LaJoie, which, if you're following Twitter, Corey has apparently claimed that Hamlin threatened to wreck him in a race and Corey got NASCAR involved, and Hamlin is now saying the entire story is false.
It's weird.
I mean, it's a weird story.
In all fairness, Hamlin and Corey LaJoie aren't going to come across each other on the track that often.
Yeah, that's kind of a David versus Goliath kind of thing right there.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing.
Oh, I'm gonna wreck you when I'm lapping you for the third time. Yeah,
because here's the thing about Hamlin, because he did say that when it comes to joking and banter, he said this during the video post-race conference when Jeff Gluck asked that question about the whole thing. It's nothing personal, but if he likes the driver, he will kind of riv him. But if he doesn't like it, he will not pull something like it. And also, he got upset about it because you got to remember, Denny Hamlin's starter was essentially little to nothing. He's not one of those paid drivers or come from a family background, and he had to work his way up, and vice versa. That's what he told. And then when this thing came out today, as we're recording this, I was thinking, because it doesn't threats and all that, it just adds more fuel to the fire, and we'll see come Friday morning where I'm from, the press video conference, what Corey has to say, and somebody's going to ask, because for sure he's been the biggest topic outside of Chase Elliott when it comes to all the melodrama that's going on in the sport.
Now, something on the more lighter side, though, to get away from the threats and all of that, Tyler Reddick almost pulled a Mark Martin at the end of the Homestead race. Coming to the white flag, he thought the race was over and was slowing to go down to pit road until the crew started screaming at him that there was one more lap left, and he went from battling Ryan Blaney for third place to finishing 4 seconds behind Blaney in fourth place.
Oh, what a bummer. What a bummer, yeah. So now, speaking of Blaney, this guy's quietly having a very good year. He hasn't won yet this year, but he sits fifth in points right now. He's got several top fives, and he looks good week in and week out. So I mean, do you feel like Ryan Blaney can put up a big fight coming down the line? I mean, you've got some big dogs doing really well this year when you look at Denny Hamlin and Harvick and Keselowski all with up there at the top of the order. But I think Blaney's an interesting guy in the mix. I think he's really, I mean, we've seen him drive very well the past several years, but I think he's really reaching that status where I feel like he's going to be a consistent winner week in and week out.
It seems kind of odd, but where the third team at Penske has always struggled historically, whether it was Brendan Gaughan when they first had a third team, Sam Horns Jr., or now Blaney. Yes, Blaney has won a race here, a race there. I think he's won once the past 3 years.
He won
once
won
each
the
year.
won the Roval.
And he won Talladega last year.
Right.
But he has been much more consistent, a bigger threat for victory. I think he's good for at least 1 or 2 wins this year, which, funny enough, this is something we used to say about Martin Truex Jr. way back when he was driving for Michael Waltrip Racing. So he almost feels like somebody like a Truex that just hasn't reached the pinnacle of what he can do yet.
Yeah, and as far as that third team, I think this is the first time the third Penske car has been pretty good since 2001. Because remember, when Newman was in the 02, he's walloping Mayfield every race that he has, as long as he doesn't wreck the thing.
And as long as the engine held on the entire race as well.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting you make the comparison to Martin Truex, because Truex is a guy I really like. But he was close to being a has-been in the sport until he suddenly caught fire. His career just took a while to get going. I think he won a race early on, and then it was 5-6 years, and now the guy's unstoppable. It's really Truex has just had a very interesting career. Once you get the combination of the right people, right place, and to the point, Furniture Row is not. Was not the pinnacle team of the sport. I mean, he certainly did his part to build that team into a giant slayer.
So let me give you some insight into Furniture Row, because obviously when I was with Childress, they were one of our alliance teams. So people sort of look at them as this, as almost all the other alliance teams out there. Now typically in NASCAR, alliance teams make up the numbers. Furniture Row's budget was probably bigger than most single car cup teams. Their budget was up there as a 2 or 3 car team, quite easily. And what they did, which caused a little bit of consternation amongst us, was they take the parts that we designed at Childress and just push them a little bit harder and, maybe grind away at a few parts, make them a little bit lighter, maybe push the boundaries, which we couldn't do, because typically in NASCAR you have to submit parts to the governing body for approval. Suspension parts all have to be approved, and then that would allow us to run them at the race or sell them to our alliance partners. But when Furniture Row got hold of them, they grind on them and buff them and tweak them and chisel them and do all these things to make them just that little bit lighter, just that little bit faster. And because they had the budget to be able to do that, they were, taking a reasonably solid product that we had at RCR and really pushed it to the limit. So they knew how to play the game. They weren't given the credit they deserved in many, many ways. They had the resources of a front running team in many, many ways. Was it Barney Vassar, the guy's name?
Visser.
Visser. He put a load of his cash into that team. And they were successful because of it. And, not only with Childress, but then also when they went to Joe Gibbs. And, I remember talking to guys at Joe Gibbs, and just after they'd started, and they were like, they're like this with you. I'm like, yeah. Do you want them back? It's like, no.
Now, the other reason why I made the comparison between Blaney and Truex, somewhat had a similar career path to Penske, because he started with Tommy Baldwin Racing at first, and he caught the eye of Brad Keselowski, who was driving for Roger and still for that matter, and Brad signed him to his truck team, which then led Blaney to sign a development deal with Penske, and he spent about 2 or 3 years running part-time schedules in trucks and Xfinity, and then a little bit with the Wood Brothers and Cup. But it wasn't until 2016, 2017 that he actually got a full-time deal. So kind of like Truex, where he was for about 4 or 5 years almost out to lunch, Blaney, by no fault of his own, was just bouncing between part-time deals.
Yeah, and he certainly found a good home, at Rogers Place. So speaking of Penske now, the one of the topics that I keep hearing coming up is that Brad Keselowski is in a contract year. And so do any of you folks feel there's any reason that Keselowski would move on from Penske?
That's an interesting one, since considering he's just won 2 races with them. Sure, circumstances play a role in that, but I feel like if he wins outright at some point, it may not change his mind, but you got to keep in mind, would Hendrick want to go for him? Would Hendrick want a veteran to start off?
Or
that's the only way he's going to move, isn't it? Is if he goes to the 48. Not that I think of any other open seats in the field that are available.
There's maybe one other open seat, and that would be the 42.
Is he at the stage? But Brad's, still, in all fairness, at the high end of his career.
Oh, I know.
And you've got to look at that 42. Is that a better option?
I'm not saying that. I'm not arguing that. I'm just throwing that one out there too. Granted, everyone keeps saying Ross Chastain is the heir apparent to the 42, but what just about everyone's forgetting is Ross has that Nutrient Ag Solutions sponsorship, which is good for a good chunk of the Cup Series schedule with the amount that they're paying for the Xfinity Series, because they're not only on Ross's car, they're paying for another about 8 to 12 races for AJ Allmendinger. So they have enough to do probably a full Cup schedule. Then you have Credit One Bank, McDonald's, and Clover on the 42. So Chip Ganassi could very easily become a 3-car team. That being said, whether or not Brad is interested in going there, I know he's also talked about in the past of expressing interest in owning his own Cup team. Whether or not that ship has sailed, because he was only talking about that last year, that's an interesting route as well. I could see him going to the 48 for a year or two and then doing something similar to what Tony Stewart did and owning his own Cup team in an alliance with Hendrick.
Or like Darrell Waltrip as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, but the
other thing you've got to think about with Brad is that he also owns a manufacturing company, and he could potentially, if that is a success, which I think it's starting to be, he could potentially, back his own ride through his sponsorship. He has his own manufacturing group, so he certainly can self-fund himself. But I could see that's I think the 48 is the only real logical move for Brad right now.
I mean, if there's a move, the thing that makes the most sense is he stays put, because I can't see any reason why.
But is the money there for him? Because obviously, by sounds of things, Miller are out.
Miller is out.
Really,
Miller is out, but they've had PPG step up and pick up a few more races. They've got tire discounters, right? And then he's the other one is the what's the other?
Alliance Truck Parts.
Alliance, and there's another
Detroit Genuine Parts.
Fitzgerald
glider kits, yeah, and there's one other I'm missing.
Moneyline.
I thought Moneyline was a Ganassi sponsor.
No, it's
no. You're right, because the Moneyline we've seen on Austin Cindric's car, yeah. So there's money there in the Penske organization, and I feel like Roger is happy with both of his lead drivers, both Joey and Brad. So I can't really see a compelling reason for them not to try to give him a contract to retain him.
But here's the thing: you can't keep Austin Cindric in Xfinity forever. And yes,
the Wood brothers.
I was going to say, but where does that leave Matty Benedetto? Because Matt's on a 2-year deal.
Yeah.
And who knows? There's also a good wild card shot for Chase Briscoe. I know I was speaking with somebody that Chase Briscoe could probably be the stealer as far as that's concerned, but we'll see how he does, because Cindric is obviously going to get top priority for a Penske or Wood Brothers ride before Briscoe could.
So there's a lot of moving parts here that if you take all of them together, to me, Brad might leave, but if he does he go to the 48 or does he start his own team in an alliance with somebody? Or does he buy into a team and make it an alliance with somebody?
Would he want to start his own team in 2021 with the new car now in 2022, though?
No, you wouldn't. You'd go into 22.
Yeah. So I could see him being at Hendrick for a year or two, and then once a new car and a new engine in 2023, once all of that is in place, maybe then starting his own team, because by then talk is that the alliance system might not mean as much as it does now.
I mean, also, you look at we talk about Brad going to the 48, but if he, say hypothetically, he doesn't, and they pick somebody else, there's not that many drivers out there that are going to be on the market with the experience that Brad has. So say they pick another young guy. I mean, what's the average age of Hendrick going to be next year, with their 4 drivers? I mean, it'll be like 22 or 23.
Yeah, they've got a lot of really young guys in there. They sure do.
And that's great, front loading your stable with young, up and coming talent, because they obviously all deserve to be where they are. But at some point you've got to have that wise head on somebody's shoulders to turn around and say, this is the direction we need to take the team. And you look at who they've lost in the last 2 or 3 years, Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Dale Earnhardt Jr., 3 guys there who you couldn't buy that experience. So if you get rid of, obviously Jimmy's leaving, if you were then to go along and, pick up another young kid in his early 20s, yes, it's cheap. But who's your team? I mean, Chase Elliott would probably be considered your team leader. But I mean, he's 24, 25? That's young to be a team leader with an organization of the magnitude as Hendrick Motorsports.
I agree. Yeah, I agree that Elliott has the potential to be a fantastic team leader.
I mean, you almost
in the future, but there's no substitute for years of experience. Except years.
Hey, let's throw a name out here. I know we're talking about the silly season, but would you look at somebody, maybe even a Ryan Newman? Give him a year in the 48 or 2, just to get that experience in there. He's probably not as quick as Chase or Alex Bowman or any of those guys.
So a veteran to kind of help the young guys out for at least a couple more years.
Give that little bit of just somebody who turns around, who can say in a team meeting, because I've been in them and I've seen them, and I was in them with Ryan, and he's for as much criticism as Ryan Newman gets, that guy knows how to drive a race car. His motivation at times could be questioned, and rightly or wrongly, but if you put him in a group of people, he will have his opinion heard, and he can turn around as well as anybody and turn around and say, you know what, guys, you're wrong. This is what we need to do. Let's just, and I think a team like Hendrick, because you know what, those cars have been fast this year. I think Hendrick has, from a consistency standpoint, have probably had, I mean, you could certainly put a blanket over Hendrick, Penske, and JGR, I think, this year in terms of outright pace. They've probably had, I know Alex Bowman's won a race and Chase has won a race. Jimmy hasn't yet, and William Byron hasn't. But the pace is there. On any other given day, Jimmy Johnson could have easily won a couple of races this year. So those, certainly Hendrick has the pace. They just need that little bit of experience, I think, going into next year.
And not that I'm going to contradict, but then you also have some, I guess, wild card picks. That would be the best way of explaining it. But Corey LaJoie made it known that he actually sent a letter to Rick Hendrick during the awards ceremony last year to make his case for the 48. And then
who wouldn't?
Yeah, I was going to say, granted, there's a lot of talk that Bubba is going to re-sign with Petty for a multi-year contract, but he was also a name that was floated for a while for the 48.
I mean, as controversial as it would be, especially given the current climate, Kyle Larson wouldn't be a bad shout.
I think Larson will end up in the 14, to be honest.
I mean, well, possibly. But you know what? You want somebody cheap? Kyle Larson certainly will not be able to command the salary now that he would have been able to 6 months ago.
Well, he still has to apply for reinstatement, though, before
he'd get that in a heartbeat, though, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
I don't think that's an issue. But, That's maybe not a bad shout. I know we were drifting off topic here. I know. Sorry.
Oh no, that's not. That's the silly season was the topic. So, but let's talk about the All-Star race. NASCAR announced that the All-Star race will move from Charlotte to Bristol, based on the fact that Tennessee will now allow sporting events with 20% of the capacity. Bristol Motor Speedway has 155,000 permanent seats, so that means at that 20% they can allow 30,000 fans in. They put tickets for sale on the website. They are absolutely reasonable. It is $65 to sit in the higher up grandstands and $35 to sit in the lower grandstands. If you're interested in tickets, you do have to sign the waiver. Provide your name and email address and click that you agree to the waiver before you can view the ticket website. And then once you purchase tickets, you're essentially buying uppers or lowers. You have no idea where you're going to sit until they get all the ticket orders in, and then they'll figure out how to space folks out. But I mean, at the end of the day, Bristol is, built like a coliseum. It's a half a mile track. Wherever you sit is a good seat. You can see the whole track from pretty much any vantage point there. So I think that'll be a neat deal to have some, actual paying fans in there. I know we're going to do some stuff with invited guests and those sort of things at some of these races coming up. We did that at Homestead. I believe we're doing that at Talladega. But, actual just genuine fans. And I don't know what they're going to do for social distancing and as far as concessions and restrooms and those sort of things, but I imagine that there'll be plans in place. I imagine they'll be handing out masks at the gate. I really don't want to try to make my head hurt by thinking how they're going to jump through all the hoops, but it will be nice to see fans at a racetrack for the first time this year. I mean, other than some of your local short tracks.
Well, for Bristol, I believe masks are recommended, not required. I don't know about Talladega, but I do know they, at least for Talladega and for Bristol, they're talking about social distancing. And for Talladega, you're also going to have RVs on the backstretch only on the outside of the track. They're not letting anyone inside the track that is not a part of a race team.
Right, so you can park outside of the backstretch and watch from the roof of your RV.
Yes.
So, well, I mean, that's not, a lot of folks enjoy that. I mean, I did that at Kentucky one year. Matter of fact, it was the year you and I went to Kentucky, Seth. I had left you in the media center. I went to join some friends of mine who had their RV out there in turn 3, and we watched from the roof of the RV, and it was a very, very kind of fun experience. I had not, watched a race from that type of vantage point before, but had a great old time.
And I want to say, at least for, I know at Homestead they had 1,000 fans, 500 members of the military and first responders, and they were all allowed to bring one guest each. I don't think they were all used all the tickets, but I know a good majority of them were. So we are slowly getting fans back here and there. It will be different from track to track. Some will have more, some will have less, some may not have any at all. I know Pocono won't have any.
Yeah, I mean, every state is a little different in what they're opening up.
Yeah,
so.
I've heard Watkins Glen might have fans, although that's not official yet.
Yeah,
That'd be interesting. And need to add on to Pocono, painfully Indianapolis.
Yeah. So it's going to be a process, unfortunately, but it's for the greater good and for everybody's safety.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, when Indy cars come to Road America, they're letting fans in there. I mean, Wisconsin is a bit more open than some other states, and again, Road America has plenty of space for distancing, so that'll be another great event there. Iowa is teetering on a decision to allow fans in at the IndyCar race, although I heard no fans at their NASCAR event.
Iowa, the NASCAR events at Iowa have been canceled.
Okay, so no NASCAR event at Iowa, but
Yeah,
the
none.
IndyCar race there. I believe I want to say like this weekend, this coming Friday, there's supposed to be an announcement. Some folks I know said there's no tickets available on the website. I said, well, it would be silly for them to sell tickets until they know for sure. That'll limit the refund process in case they decide not to allow fans in. But from what I'm hearing, they're really leaning towards allowing fans in at Iowa. Iowa as a state is becoming more and more open up. So things are slowly feeling normal. I still, certain things just to me don't look right. The empty victory circle, the microphone on a stick, so we don't have to get too close to the winning driver. It's all weird. It's all bizarre. But my gosh, it's so much better than when all we had to entertain us was iRacing.
Which honestly, iRacing is still around for those interested.
I know you're a big iRacing fan, Seth.
One thing I do want to mention iRacing was Parker Klingerman and Landon Castle teamed up to promote the Firecracker 400. They're using the brand new to iRacing anyway, 1987 NASCAR Ford Thunderbird in Monte Carlo at the Legacy version of Daytona, and with a $12,500 prize up for grabs, with 344 entries.
Wow. I also hear they're doing a big virtual Le Mans as well. I saw.
They had it last week.
Well, no,
was it last week?
That one wasn't iRacing. That one was R Factor, and they had enough technical issues. Their server crashed mid-race. Before the server crash, Alonso was 69 laps down. After the server crash, he was 6 laps down.
Nice.
So
nice. Sound like the Alonso has a hacker working for him.
But the iRacing 24 Hours of Le Mans, or thanks to the ACO basically threatening legal action because they didn't want the same 24 copyrighted logo being used. iRacing's 24 Hours of Racing in the French countryside at Le Mans.
That's a mouthful.
Blame the ACO for that one.
Yeah. So anyway, let's talk about the other news this week, which was the Hall of Fame selections for NASCAR. And Louise, you wanted to lead that discussion, so you go right ahead, sir.
Absolutely. So yesterday, after a month delay, they finally announced the class of 2021 NASCAR Hall of Fame inductees. It's the first time, instead of 5, they'll allow 3. 2 for the modern era and 1 for the Pioneer. On the Pioneer side, it's going to be none other than Red Farmer, who will be racing in Alabama this weekend, by the way, and will be 88 years old in October. So this confirms he's born in 1932 because there's that birth year dispute. Anyways, back to what I was saying. I'll talk more about Red briefly, kind of the question that I asked and kind of like why his win at Daytona in 71 was important. From the modern era committee, it was the late Mike Stefanik, 7-time modified champion, 2-time Busch North champion, now known as the ARCA East, and of course, first ballot Hall of Famer Dale Earnhardt Jr., who had 76% of the votes to get in this time around. So it wasn't unanimous. It wasn't like 80 or 90% like Jeff Gordon had a couple years ago, but a good range. And Ralph Seagraves is the landmark award winner, with the Squire Hall Award, as usual, will be announced at a later time. As far as Red, it's an interesting story that I learned. The question I asked naturally was the toughest competitor he ever had. And considering he's been racing for well over 60 plus years, almost 70, he mentioned Bobby and Donnie Allison, of course, Fireball Robert. He didn't really had a specific one. Well, when I totally understood, because he's been racing for a long time. There's so many competitors. He's raced pretty much with them all, except for probably Haley Deegan at this point. But yeah.
Give him time.
I know he's still. It blows my mind that dude is still racing. But my gosh, you know what I mean? What a career he's had.
Well, yeah I was gonna say, there's only one driver, to my knowledge, that has raced with Red Farmer, Red Byron, the first NASCAR champion, and Hailie Deegan, and that's Herschel McGriff.
Who, in hand, got the second most votes, which in this case would be the first one out. So come to 2022, he could be the favorite to go ahead for the 2022 class. But as far as Red, the reason why he talked about the 71 Permatex 300 being his all-time favorite one was considering that his mom was at the track. It was the first time, to his knowledge, she ever went to the race. She hardly went to any at all before, maybe at most 5. But for her mom to be there on her birthday, February 13th, 71, that was such a big deal for him. And that, I think hearing Red's stories for a half an hour during the video conference yesterday, and stuff like that I never heard, and it's stuff that I relish hearing about, because in this day and age, it's always appreciate what you have and who are telling the stories, not just in the NASCAR side, but also in the American Open Wheel, because there's plenty of those legends still out there. Just embrace it, take the time to learn, and you'll come out of it with a good smile and a different perspective of how racing was back then to what it is today.
Yeah, racing certainly has changed a ton. And to your point, one of my favorite things to do is to talk to older drivers, and usually they have the at Indianapolis on the Saturday before the race, they have Legends Day, and they always have a couple of really big autograph sessions with a bunch of past drivers from going all the way back to more recent. And usually what I'll do, I don't like to wait in line for autographs, but usually once that thing kind of finishes up, you'll find a lot of guys just with their families strolling around the Pagoda Plaza. If I recognize somebody, I'll strike up a conversation, and it's always have a great conversation with some of those old folks, those guys who've really built a sport. So I just love it.
Frank, I mean, you have to go and ask people. Frank, you have to go and ask people for autographs. I thought they'd come and give you an autograph. Just they know who you are, sure.
Oh no, I don't collect autographs at all. I just like to strike up conversations. So no, Richard. People generally ask me for my autograph. So, but I digress. So we're off to Talladega next. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Well, let's talk about Talladega a little bit. It's always a crapshoot. But one thing that we haven't been doing this year on the show on a regular basis is picking winners. So let's try to talk about Talladega a little bit, and then try to pick some winners, and then let's talk a little bit about Formula One, because I understand there's a interesting thought out there about reconfiguring one of the tracks, and we'll get to that in a moment. But Seth, Talladega.
Well, as always, it's going to be unpredictable. They did change the package a little bit. Instead of it being 550 horsepower, it's going to be 510 horsepower. That should slow the speeds down by, I think they said about 5 miles per hour, 5 to 10 miles per hour, which is about 1 to 2 seconds on track. Not to mention there's various safety improvements following Newman and LaJoie's crash at Daytona. There's, instead of 1 Newman bar now, I believe there's 2 plus a LaJoie bar now. What's so funny, Richard?
That's about right for Ryan to have 2 bars, isn't they?
Jeez, I figured it was something related to that.
Sorry.
Moving on from that. There's not going to be any practice.
Sorry.
The practice session that had been planned, it would have only been 30-minute practice anyway, has been scrapped. So it's just show up and race. I mean,
for a super speedway, that you want to get a little bit of practice in the pack, don't you? A little bit of drafting practice.
But apparently, it's just going to be show up and race. So I believe the only person.
Okay.
I believe the only
it
person.
Seems to me like Talladega is one of those tracks you want your setup to be spot on.
Yeah, it's probably why
there's so
it's
little.
low turnout for
the problem is with the super speedway. There's very little setup you can do, because like your springs and everything they're all given to you by NASCAR.
Well, and as far as
there's
ARCA,
not much you can do.
As far as ARCA is concerned, the reason why ARCA only has 21 cars, one team shut down during the pandemic, two teams scaled back because of where their drivers or sponsors are located, and one is based in Canada, so they can't actually come to the U.S.
That's the Van Viergen team, right?
Yeah, Red Jones Racing, yes. So that explains 4 of the teams that are not showing up that were in Daytona. Plus, some of the other teams that were in Daytona that are not showing up, like Ken Schrader, for example, they just weren't able to get a sponsor and a driver. So...
And I'd imagine it's not feasible to just bring a car, wreck it right away, and not have it in any experience. I think for a race like where everything that's happened, there's so many factors as to why it's just a low turnout. It's basically like a healthy ARCA field these days on an intermediate track.
It's essentially going to be Venturini versus DJ Crosley. But going back to the Cup Series, we're going to have James Davison making his debut. He is the only driver, to my knowledge, this weekend that has absolutely zero experience on a super
I was going to
speed.
ask, how can he get approval to race it then? Because normally, like when you race Daytona, you've got to do ARCA races, or you've got to do some.
The reason why he got approved is because of his overall experience racing throughout the world. And that
I was going to say Davison's run the Indy 500, so you can't say he's got zero experience on a super speedway.
But I mean,
maybe not in a NASCAR
but the Indy
car.
500 is completely different from a NASCAR super speedway.
Yeah.
I mean, this is pack racing. This is a different world altogether. And I know they're pretty tight on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, like Danica
Does he not
Montoya
have to
got
run
run
the ARCA race then?
My understanding is what the only...
Daria had to do that, didn't he?
Yeah, Danica and Montoya, too, had to run ARCA Super Speedway before they even allowed them to run on a big ovals on Cup or Xfinity. It was then nationwide at the time.
Well, to be fair, I believe one of the Xfinity cars is still TBA, so maybe he'll slide into that to get some experience. I don't know.
That's the 07, right?
Yes, that's the 07. That being said, honestly, he got approval for the 500, even though the deal never materialized. He got approval to run that without running ARCA, Xfinity, or trucks. So if he got approval to run the 500, honestly, that approval just shifted to Talladega.
Yeah, the whole thing is interesting.
I might as well try and enter then.
Yeah, you might as well. So, speaking of which, guys, we only got a couple of minutes left, and I do want to get to Formula One. So, everybody, real quick, pick a winner for Talladega.
I'm going with Erik Jones.
All right. Seth?
Bubba Wallace.
Richard?
Brendan Gaughan.
Brendan Gaughan. Okay, that's out of left field. But I'm going to go with Keselowski because...
That's a boring pick, isn't it?
Adoring, yes, I know. Keselowski always runs well at Talladega. So, Richard, talk to me about this revised Formula One course that almost looks like an oval.
But, yeah. It's more of a square than an oval, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, but it's quite funny because apparently nobody told Bahrain.
It's like the Caesar Palace parking lot, the layout.
Yeah, I mean, it's so for those of you that know the Bahrain circuit, you've got turns 1, 2, 3, the little complex. Turn 4, the right-hander, but instead of like doubling back on yourself and going to the infield, it's like a shortcut between turn 4 and turn 12 or 13, whatever it is. Which was never meant that the circuit that the Formula One was proposed was never designed as a circuit. The reason that little cut throughs there is so that they could actually run 2 circuits simultaneously. So you could have like a south circuit and a north circuit both running at the same time. And it turns out that when the Bahrain circuit was asked for their opinion, their response was, "Oh, yeah, nobody asked us." So Formula One have turned around and said, "Yeah, we're going to run on this almost oval," which is not an almost oval, goodness me. Square track, and nobody asked Bahrain if they can do that. I mean, they can. If you remember back to 2010, they actually run an elongated Bahrain circuit as a celebration for the 60th Grand Prix or what, 60th season of Formula One.
Right. Now, are they planning on? Is it a double header? They're going to run one race on the regular circuit and then the other on the modified circuit.
That's the plan. Yeah. That'll be in like early December, I think the timescale is, and then mid-December they'd go to Abu Dhabi, because I think Abu Dhabi contractually has to be the last race of the season in Formula One. So they could move Abu Dhabi, but if they move it, everything else has to move as well. So if they keep pushing these races out, which by those things they're going to, Abu Dhabi always has to be the last race of the season. And they pay a lot of money for that.
Yeah, it may end up happening in 2021. It might be in January or February.
Yeah.
By the way, we keep pushing out. So Formula One is set to start in Australia, correct?
Austria,
and that's in July, right?
July the 5th. Yeah.
July
5th. Isn't for me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that'll be a great weekend, because we'll have Indy cars racing at the Indy Grand Prix, Xfinity on the road course there, Formula One race to watch, and then, of course, the Brickyard 400 coming up for July 4th weekend. In between there, we've got Talladega coming up. So, but we are out of time. So,
very quickly before we go, I know we're cutting short on time, but we talk about double headers. Well, you want a packed schedule, Formula E in Berlin. We're not having 6 races at the same circuit on the same time period. I mean,
six races.
9 days.
6 races in 9 days.
In Utah?
It's on the old, original Berlin
Tempelhof.
Airport. They've used that before, Stoppelhof Airport, whatever it's called. Yeah, they've used it before for Formula. Yeah, it's easy for you to say. They've used it a number of times for Formula E, and then it went away, and then it's just a big old disused airfield, really. So it's a perfect location for it. But they're going to look to run 6 races there in a 2-week period or 10-day period.
Just kind of bang out 1/3 of the season all at once, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess they can't all do it in like 2 days, because they've got to give the batteries time to recharge.
Yeah.
They only need 2 races though for it to count as an official season. They only need another 2.
Have they already had 2? They've already had some, haven't they?
They've had.
Because they go like over the winter, don't they? They'll have like a 1920 season, or 2019 to 2020 season.
They've had 6, and I believe they need 8.
Okay, yeah.
So they only need 2.
And they're double
so
headers,
I don't know
aren't
how
they?
to do
So
with 6.
I think every Formula E.
Because I mean, the more the merrier, Seth. Just because 8 makes it official. I mean, why not have a little more competition there? But hey, you guys, remember what I said about 2 minutes ago about being out of time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's
right.
I wasn't making that up. So we are out of time. So I want to thank you, Richard, Seth, Louise. Appreciate you guys a ton. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and Google Podcasts. And I want to thank all you folks that listen to us week in and week out. Well, until next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.